We are on our second day of introducing the Constitution. Had a lot of fun the first day, having a little constitutional convention and hammering out a class constitution. But today is a lot more of heavy lifting. So you can either watch this video, go into your book, get in touch with a friend, or look at this PowerPoint on Google Classroom. Whatever works for you works for me. So let's start off with the basics of basics. The definition. So a constitution is a nation's basic law. It creates political institution, assigns or divides powers in government, and often provides certain guarantees to citizens. Let me dispel a myth that I have heard. Some people think America is the only country with the Constitution. That is not true. There are dozens of countries that buy into this concept of, on a document, let's write it down, that has the laws and institutions and powers written out for the people to know. Now, you can make an argument America is the gold standard, it's the most copied. That's a fair argument, but we are not the only country with a constitution. Now, in terms of the origins, you have to go all the way back to the French and Indian War. So colonists, this is before we were America proper, we were the 13 colonies. Colonists got taxed because of the French and Indian War. And they were frustrated because these people who are getting taxed didn't have direct representation in Parliament. Therefore, people took matters into their own hands, and colonial leaders formed the Continental Congress to address abuses of the English, which eventually turned into the Declaration of Independence, which was a document. Thomas Jefferson writing down the grievances they had against Daddy England, and we're ready to break away from you, and it was adopted July 4th, 4th of July, our birthday, 1776, Philadelphia 76ers, and essentially it was announcing the revolution and justifying it philosophically, and Thomas Jefferson's pen did a wonderful job expressing very eloquent sentiments. That was a mouthful right there. Now, even though we broke away from the English, there's some influence they had. Now, these English Enlightenment philosophers, these ideas of natural rights, that there are certain rights every human being has, and they're not dependent on government. You are born with them, they're inalienable, they cannot be taken from you. Now, this idea of consent of the governed, that the government derives its authority by sanction of the people, not the other way around. And this idea of limited government, that certain restrictions should be placed on government to protect the rights of citizens. So these philosophical ideas are at the foundation of our Constitution. And here's an example. Here's John Locke in our Declaration. I'm not going to go through this whole chart for the sake of time, but here's how much we took from him. So Locke wrote, "The state of nature has a law to govern it, life, liberty, and property." And Thomas Jefferson wrote, "Laws of nature and nature's God, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So you can see this heavy influence of John Locke and the Enlightenment philosophy movement. Now, America does win the Revolutionary War, if you recall from history, 1783. America wins, and they call this a conservative revolution because essentially the people fighting said, hey, we got what was coming to us. These are the rights that we were taken from us by the English, and we got them back. So it really wasn't a major change of culture or lifestyle. That's why they called it a conservative revolution. And then we tried our first way to run ourselves. Now, I have a separate class for this, so I'm going to skip through this, but let me give you an analogy. When you get out on your own, 18, 19, 20, 21, I promise you, you're going to make mistakes. It's just part of the deal. But enlightened, intelligent people learn from the mistakes and try to do better next time. So the Articles of Confederation were a mess, and I will, again, go into this another day, but needless to say, it failed. Here's more evidence that it failed. We went over in class. It was just not working out. So, like I said, plan A didn't work. Let's move on. So let's go on to what became the Constitution. So it starts off in Philadelphia, and if you've ever been to Philadelphia, they are quite proud of their history. If you are a government buff or a U.S. history buff, I'll tell you, Philadelphia and Boston, those are the two cities you got to hit up. And 55 men from 12 of the 13 states showed up. They were mostly wealthy people, college graduates with some political experience. So this is a pretty elite group that started things off. And again, they were taking this Enlightenment philosophy and attempting to put it into something tangible. And again, Enlightenment principles, human nature, self-interested, political conflict leads to factions. So how can you improve on a self-interested human nature? How can you lessen factions? And the objects of government, including the preservation of property, that as a citizen, you should be able to preserve your property, and the nature of government, which sets power against power, so no one faction rises above and overwhelms another. These are the philosophical principles they were attempting to put into action. So we had this debate, and it was not, quick and easy. Believe me, people are very different. And you had this New Jersey plan that said, hey, everybody gets the same. All 13 colonies get the same. And the Virginia plan said, hey, it should be based on population. You can probably guess Virginia had a lot of population. So what happened was a compromise. And the modern version of this is we have a Senate, 2 from every state. Even the low population states like Wyoming get 2, like the big population states like Texas and California. And the House is like the Virginia plan, where it is based on population. Now, this one is pretty distasteful looking at it with 2023 eyes, but 3/5 compromise. So the Southerners, they had slaves, wanted to count all the slaves because that would make them more powerful. The North said you can't count slaves. And they hammered out a deal that a human being is worth 3/5 of a person. Yes, that is problematic. Okay, so anyway, so they did get resolved. Now, in terms of that, we talked about, the 3/5 compromise and the Connecticut compromise. Now, in terms of the economic issues, now the states had tariffs on products from other states. Paper money was worthless, and Congress couldn't raise money. These were part of the flaws of the Articles of Confederation. So how they fixed it, they strengthened Congress, okay? They limited the powers of the states, and they started essentially collecting money. The Congress could levy taxes, pay debts, borrow money, coin money, regulate interstate and foreign commerce, establish uniform laws of bankruptcies, punish piracy, this sort of thing. So essentially, they put money in America's pocket, which the Articles of Confederation could not do. Now, in terms of the individual rights issues, some are written into the Constitution. So essentially, we have these groups that are saying, okay, you have Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Federalists want a really big federal government, and Anti-Federalists want more power at the state level. And we see this modern connection. In a sense, the modern Democratic Party would be like the Federalist back then, and the modern Republican Party would be like the Anti-Federalist. Okay, so the reason how these issues were fixed was essentially the Bill of Rights, right? Now, the Madisonian model. Now, the Madisonian model, real AP stuff right here. To prevent a tyranny of the majority, Madison proposed a government of limiting majority control, separating powers, creating checks and balances, and establishing a federal system. These are the building blocks of what went on to become the Constitution and consequently what America was built upon, okay? And you can see the voters, and you have the electoral process, and you can see we're seeing the nuts and bolts. So this is a lot more, how can I put it? It works. How's that? Okay, the Articles of Confederation didn't work. They fattened it up to where it did work pretty gosh darn well. Okay, here's the separation of powers. We went over that during Foundation. Now, in terms of the Madisonian model, it's the creation of a constitutional republic. And I think you know what a republic is by now. It's a form of government in which the people select representatives to govern them and make laws. Like we said in class, democracy for big groups. Now, it does favor the status quo. Change is slow. And the document was approved, but not unanimously. Then it had to get ratified. Now, ratified means they have to have enough people agree to this. So you can see Anti-Federalists, these are tended to be farmers and shopkeeper and laborers. Again, they wanted a strong state government, and Federalists wanted a strong national government. These were mainly landowners, wealthy merchants, professionals. So you can see the differences were there from the beginning. So you have these two sides. They had to come to some degree of compromise to get it ratified. And what happened were these Federalist Papers, and believe me, we're going to go into these in great detail coming up. And they were 85 articles written by Alexander Hamilton. Feel free to sing the song. And there's a million things I haven't done. Okay, there, you got it out of your system. John Jay and James Madison under the names Publius to defend the Constitution. And the result of this, in order to get this ratification, the Bill of Rights had to be put in. The first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. They were drafted in response to some of the anti-federalist concern about the lack of basic liberties. So all I say to you anti-federalists, thank you, okay? Because I think like you, I'm pretty much down with basic liberties. That's a good thing, right? Okay, so you can see the amendments. Okay, that's for another day. Now, in terms of ratification, lacking majority support, the Federalists specify that the Constitution be ratified by state conventions, not state legislatures. Delaware first ratified the Constitution on December 7, 1787. A little trivia, Delaware is the first state. And New Hampshire's approval, the ninth state to ratify, made the Constitution official 6 months later. Okay, so in 1788, it was on. Now, the Constitution can be amended, and again, this is for a later day. I'm not going to go over in this video. I'm already over time, but we will get into that. But I think the beauty and the brilliance of the Constitution is its ability to be changed. Okay, and the first 10 were the Bill of Rights, and as I speak to you now, there are now 27 of them. Okay, now, of all of this, Marbury versus Madison. It established judicial review, but most importantly, it had the Supreme Court, or excuse me, it had the Constitution be the supreme law of the land, or as I call it, the most important precedent in U.S. history, okay? So once Marbury versus Madison was established, this is the Constitution with its power, you know, like it is today. Really, you can mark 1803 as the day the Constitution became the supreme law of the land. That's important. And I mentioned the ability to change. Now, your book said flexibility. Now, the Constitution is short, fewer than 8,000 words, and it does not prescribe every detail, and there is an intelligence in doing it that way. There is no mention of congressional committees or independent regulatory commissions. The Constitution is not static, but flexible for future generations to determine their own needs. It reminds me of that story I told you in class of the reed and the oak tree. Okay, the monastery, huge storm, monks walk out, old monk, young monk. Hey, young monk, what do you notice? Hey, the big tree got knocked down. Okay, great. What do you notice is still standing? Those reeds. Why does the oak tree fall and the reeds not? The oak tree is inflexible. The reeds are flexible. There's some very deep wisdom, and that wisdom is in our Constitution, okay? Now, the Constitution and democracy, the Constitution is rarely described as democratic. Now, there has been a gradual democratization of the Constitution. Okay, obviously, the elimination of slavery and women being able to vote. So, you know, and then 18-year-olds being able to vote. So it has been gradual, and we've moved to more progress over the years. Now, the Constitution and the scope of government. Much of the Constitution reinforces individualism and provides multiple access points for citizens. It also encourages stalemates and limits governments. Okay, so this is the root of the Constitution. Now, here's the summary. I apologize for running long, but I took a whole hour's class and tried to distill it into something quick. Now, the Constitution was ratified to strengthen congressional economic powers, even with disagreements over issues of equality. Protection of individual rights guaranteed through the Bill of Rights. Formal and informal changes continue to shape our Madisonian system of government. And that is it. And that is the end of the introduction to the Constitution. And all those things you saw and all those things I skipped over, we will be going over in great detail in the next week or two. So I appreciate you watching.